Charles Manson, one of the most infamous criminal figures of the 20th century, is synonymous with chaos, manipulation, and murder. He was born during the Great Depression on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, into a turbulent and unstable environment. His mother was just 16 years old at the time of his birth, and struggled with her own issues as a prostitute and an alcoholic. The absence of a stable parental figure and the chaos of his early upbringing were defining elements in Manson's formative years. These circumstances set the stage for a life marked by continual disarray and deviance. Manson's childhood was deeply troubled, characterized by neglect and abuse. His mother's erratic behavior and frequent absences meant that he was often left in the care of relatives or ended up in juvenile facilities. This exposure to a harsh and unstable environment from such a young age had a profound impact on Manson, shaping his outlook and behavior. Probation reports from his youth describe him as suffering from a marked degree of rejection, instability, and psychic trauma, and constantly striving for status and securing some kind of love. These assessments underline the psychological scars that haunted Manson, driving much of his later behavior. After numerous stints in juvenile centres, Manson began his foray into crime, with petty thefts and auto thefts, which eventually escalated, landing him in and out of reform schools and later federal prisons. By the time he was released in 1967, Manson had spent more than half of his life in institutional settings. Despite these challenges, he possessed a charismatic, manipulative personality that allowed him to influence others profoundly, and these traits would serve him particularly well in the years that followed his newfound freedom. After a stint panhandling in the streets to get by, Manson became acquainted and moved in with Mary Brunner, a 23-year-old graduate, in her apartment in Berkeley, California, where it is said, despite her initial resistance, Manson managed to convince her to permit 18 other women to live with them in her apartment. Now, based across the bay in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, an epicentre for the 60s counterculture movement, Manson established himself as a guru, and it is here that he began to cultivate a following, with Manson targeting those who were emotionally insecure and social outcasts. On a side, but nevertheless important note, during this time, Manson had ambitions to become a musician, ambitions which were almost realised, had things turned out differently. This almost moment came in the summer of 1968, when Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys picked up two female hitchhikers and invited them to his home just outside Los Angeles. Whilst at his home, they got onto the subject of transcendental meditation, as seemed inevitable in the late 1960s, upon which the two females revealed they had their own guru, Charles Manson, or Charlie as they called him. Subsequently, Wilson welcomed Manson and some 20 members of his cult, all female, into his home. Charmed by his persona, Wilson and Manson sparked an unusual friendship, where Manson was introduced to several key figures in the music industry, such as Neil Young, who allegedly stated Manson was an improvisational genius. Manson particularly tried to impress Wilson's close friend, Terry Melcher, son of actor Doris Day and an influential producer at Columbia Records. But Melcher was wary of this unkempt man with the intense stare, a feeling shared by other members of the Beach Boys, so nothing came of it. Nevertheless, Dennis Wilson was convinced of Manson's talent and set up a recording session through the Beach Boys label Brother Records. However, this ended on bad terms when Manson pulled out a knife to express his irritation with the studio engineer. From here, Wilson distanced himself from Manson after becoming tired of financing him and his followers, and to avoid confrontation, fled his Los Angeles home that he was renting, putting the onus on the landlord to kick Manson and his followers out. Interestingly, Wilson took Manson's song, Cease to Exist, recrafted it as Never Learn Not to Love, and took sole credit for the track, meaning Manson did not receive a penny. So close, yet so far. After this foray into music, Manson returned his attention to his teachings and following, which was growing in size. His influence extended beyond mere charisma. It reached into the deep psyche of his followers. Known as the Family, this collective, peaking at around 100 individuals, shared Manson's disdain for societal norms and his penchant for an unconventional lifestyle, fueled by habitual use of hallucinogenic drugs, including LSD and magic mushrooms. Their shared devotion to Manson's teachings and lifestyle choices bound them together in a tight-knit community. Whilst many of the ideals and habits of Manson largely aligned with the hippie movement, there were other things that he felt and believed that were markedly different to the spirit of the time, and these views would begin to be expressed to his followers by 1968, albeit secluded away from wider San Francisco hippie society. Manson sought a retreat from the city, leading the family to relocate from San Francisco to a deserted ranch in the remote reaches of the San Fernando Valley, in a rundown farmstead turned movie set, Spawn Ranch. Here, amidst the desolate landscape, they lived out Manson's vision of communal living. A free-thinking, rural commune was totally in keeping with the quest for alternative living, felt by many at the time. And by many accounts, it was, in fact, a tranquil and idealistic experience for those who lived there. In other words, a fairly typical commune experience. This optimistic mood would begin to change, however, as it was during this period where the darker parts of Manson's mind began to reveal themselves. Within the family, Manson's influence was most potent among a small, hardcore unit of impressionable young girls. These individuals, drawn in by Manson's charisma and promises of enlightenment, became fervent believers in his delusions. Within this group, Manson melded elements of Scientology, fringe psychology, and his distorted interpretations of the Bible into a coherent, albeit destructive, philosophy. He preached about an impending apocalyptic race war between the black minority and white majority he called Helter Skelter, named after the Beatles' song, which he believed contained cryptic prophecies of such a race war. It is clear, from this point, Manson's idyllic commune had become more akin to a doomsday cult. Manson used his followers' search for meaning and belonging to bind them to his will, which would result in a string of brutal murders. Manson's followers, under his twisted direction, committed a total of 9 confirmed murders, with this figure reaching as high as 24 when including unconfirmed cases linked to him. The most notorious of these were the Tate LaBianca murders in August 1969, marking a gruesome chapter in American history. On August 8th, members of the family brutally took the lives of actress Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant, and 4 others in her home, sending shockwaves through the entertainment industry and society at large. The following night, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca fell victim to the same senseless violence. The motives behind these heinous acts have been heavily debated. Whilst for some, it was to incite the race war he had predicted, others suggest the murders were part of Manson's personal revenge against the music industry who had rejected him, with members of Manson's family stating that Tate's home being the former residence of Terry Melcher, the music producer who turned down Charles Manson, was the motive for the murder, not specifically the people who were killed. The murder cast a dark shadow over the 1960s hippie movement, punctuating its decline with a brutal reminder of his vulnerabilities. Manson's cultish manipulation and the gruesome killings shattered the euphoria of peace and love, revealing a darker underbelly of countercultural idealism. The sense of communal unity gave way to fear and suspicion, marking a symbolic end to an era of optimism and highlighting the complexities inherent in the pursuit of societal change. Following the murders, Manson and several members of his family were arrested and charged with the crimes. During the trial, Manson's manipulative nature and the extent of his control over his followers were put on full display, horrifying the public. In 1971, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, directing the deaths of the Tate LaBianca victims, among others. Manson was originally sentenced to death, but this was automatically commuted to life in prison when California temporarily abolished the death penalty in 1972. Manson spent the rest of his life in prison, where he continued to be a figure of intense media interest, often giving bizarre interviews that showcased his unsettling charisma and unrepentant attitude. Throughout his incarceration, Manson remained a symbol of manipulative control and the dangers posed by cult personalities. Charles Manson died on November 19, 2017, in prison, leaving behind a legacy that serves as a grim reminder of the capacity for violence and manipulation under the guise of charismatic leadership. His life story raises continuing questions about the nature of psychological influence and the vulnerabilities of those who fall under the sway of such figures. Manson's journey from neglected child to notorious leader of a murderous cult underscores the complex interplay of psychological damage, societal marginalization, and the profound need for belonging and identity. Thank you for watching. If you would like to see more on a wide variety of interesting topics, then like, comment, and subscribe.